Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paravrajapacharya Astottara Satyashri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Vaishnav Sangha Vaishnav Seva Ki Jai Natai Gaura Premanandi Hari Bol. So we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. I have done my part. I guess it's just wherever the sticker is. Is that right? Just where the sticker is. Tamal Krishna read Prabhupada a letter from Giriraj, more like a loving prayer than a letter. Giriraj had quoted a verse by Prahlad Maharaj from Srimad Bhagavatam. My dear Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, because of my association with material desires one after another, I was gradually falling into a blind well full of snakes, following the general populace. But your servant Narada Muni kindly accepted me as his disciple and instructed me how to achieve this transcendental position. Therefore, my first duty is to serve him. How could I leave his service? Srila Prabhupada was very affectionate towards Giriraj for his faithful, fearless service, and he listened with great appreciation, closing his eyes and drinking in every word of the prayer. That same evening, Srila Prabhupada sat up to receive a member of parliament, Sri Sitaram Singh. Although he was appreciative that a highly placed man was visiting, he spoke on the absolute plane, exposing material illusions. Immediately, he attacked the narrow-mindedness of politicians with their party politics. He also exposed the rascaldom of politicians who claimed to support non-violence on the basis of the Bhagavad Gita. At times like this, the devotees with Srila Prabhupada would almost forget that he was making preparations for the end of life. Later that night, after Mr. Singh had left, Prabhupada said, "I can speak some more, or if Krishna desires, then whatever I have given already, that is all." Srila Prabhupada was unlimitedly willing to speak about Krishna and to help give Krishna consciousness to others. But how much longer he would stay, how much more he would give was up to Krishna. With more time, he would carry on Krishna's will in the material world. But if Krishna's desire was that he should leave, then he would also accept that willingly. Even if he had to soon depart from this world, he could not simply shut off his burning compassion, his preaching spirit. Most of all, he desired that what he had started, a worldwide movement to save suffering souls, should continue. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Excuse me. Hare Krishna. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 14, the Forest of Enjoyment, text number 36. It's very complicated Sanskrit. I can just try and go through it one word at a time. Kvachit shina dana sayasana sanadyupaboga vihino yavad apratilabdha manoratopagattadane vasitamatis tatastato vamanadini janad abilabhate. We won't ask everyone to repeat. We'll just go through word by word. Kvachit, sometimes. Shinadana, not having sufficient money. Saya asana adi, accommodations for sleeping, sitting, or eating. Upabhoga, of material enjoyment. Vihina, being bereft. Yavat, as long as. Apratilabdha, not achieved. Manorata, by his desire. Upagata, obtained. Adane, in seizing by unfair means. Avasita mati, whose mind is determined. Tata, because of that. Tata, from that. Avamana adini, insults and punishment. Janat, from the people in general. Abilabhate, he gets. Translation. Sometimes, having no money, the conditioned soul does not get sufficient accommodations. Sometimes he doesn't even have a place to sit, nor does he have the other necessities. In other words, he falls into scarcity. And at that time, when he is unable to secure the necessities by fair means, he decides to seize the property of others unfairly. When he cannot get the things he wants, he simply receives insults from others, and thus becomes very morose. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. It is said that necessity knows no law. When the conditioned soul needs money to acquire life's bare necessities, he adopts any means. He begs, borrows, or steals. Instead of receiving these things, he is insulted and chastised. Unless one is very well organized, one cannot accumulate riches by unfair means. Even if one acquires riches by unfair means, he cannot avoid punishment and insult from the government or the general populace. There are many instances of important peoples embezzling money, getting caught, and being put in prison. One may be able to avoid the punishment of prison, but one cannot avoid the punishment of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who works through the agency of material nature. This is described in Bhagavad Gita. Devihi Gunamayi Mamamaya Duratyaya. Nature is very cruel. She does not excuse anyone. When people do not care for nature, they commit all kinds of sinful activities, and consequently they have to suffer. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitamtam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Pradajana Sahitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastichadi Shatarane Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, excuse me. Sometimes, having no money, the conditioned soul does not get sufficient accommodations. Sometimes he doesn't even have a place to sit, nor does he have the other necessities. In other words, he falls into scarcity. And at that time, when he is unable to secure the necessity by fair means, he decides to seize the property of others unfairly. When he cannot get the things he wants, he simply receives insults from others and thus becomes very morose. So it's quite an awkward situation that we find ourselves in. The world that we live in at the moment is really geared towards encouraging and really fanning the flames of greed and material acquisition more and more and more. Some years ago, some of our devotees, they went to visit Vrindavan, and while they were there, they were invited to take lunch in the house of one resident of Vrindavan. And this person lived, he had his family, his wife, and I don't know how many children, 2 or 3 children. And they lived in a very, very tiny little apartment, practically like one room. And, very, very simple situation. And one of the devotees asked him, well, how is it that you're able to live so simply? And his answer was basically just to say, well, this is how tall I am. This is how wide I am. How much do I need? Obviously, we can understand that in different ways. The climate's definitely a little more conducive in India most of the time for the children not to be sitting in the house all day long. But still, the principle is there, is that, you know, how much we need compared to how much we want and how much we desire is quite often two different pictures. And it's, you know, there's a very, very specific and effective science which is there in marketing to convince people that they need things that they don't actually need. So through advertising and through marketing and through so many different mediums, we are really convinced very, very strongly that we need certain things in life. We really need these things. We can't do without these things. And I'm certainly guilty of it. I can't speak on behalf of anyone else here, but, you know, I'm certainly guilty of it. I can't honestly say that my old phone is completely at death's door before I get the new one. You know, likewise, so many other things, you know, so, you know, we're guilty of really feeling, and very often it's through the medium of advertising and through the medium of different types of promotion, then we're convinced through this very, very technical science of marketing and advertising and promotion that we need things that we actually do not need. And this really fans this flame of greed within the heart. We may not necessarily see it as greed. We may not think of ourselves as being greedy, but still that desire to have more than we actually need is very much there in the world in which we live right now. When a few, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we had one devotee, Ajita Prabhu. He came and stayed for a few days, and he was sort of teaching us how to use social media and marketing as tools for sharing Krishna consciousness. And, you know, when he was actually showing that, you know, there are certain techniques that we can use to share Krishna consciousness, which are material techniques. You combine certain colors together, you use certain fonts, you present things in certain ways, you use certain words in your presentation, you use particular types of pictures from particular types of angles, and all these have been you know, we've learned through psychology that these are ways to convince people to have an interest in something that they wouldn't otherwise have an interest in. So although Krishna is all attractive, you know, in one sense we can say, well, Krishna is all attractive. Still, if we put a picture of Krishna with, you know, a few words underneath, program at the Hare Krishna temple tonight, it's not necessarily that everyone's going to come just on the strength of a picture of all attractive Krishna. So we can use these techniques and these methods to attract people. But these techniques and these methods, they're also being used to convince not just us as devotees, but just everyone in the world that they need so many things that they don't actually need. And then in this way, this flame of greed within the heart is being fanned more and more and more. And in order to accommodate those things which have become needs in our life, then we need money. And so here, you know, Srila Prabhupada saying in the purport that necessity knows no law. You know, once we have this desire for more and more money, then there is nothing that the living entity won't do to acquire that. And the living entity will risk his or her life to acquire money to get things which they even don't need. You know, it's I mean, maybe it's not quite as dangerous in this country, but in certain countries in the world, like in the United States, if you break into someone's house, you risk being shot. There was a thing on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. Every now and again, these crazy things come up, like, and it was saying, if I broke into your house, what would I find on top of your fridge? and different people were giving answers, and it was quite funny. There were quite a few devotees that were giving answers, and they were saying, you wouldn't get as far as my fridge, you would get shot. So you risk being killed, breaking into someone's house in order to get some extra wealth, and not always out of necessity. We could say sometimes people out of desperation do these things, and it's certainly the case that there may be some desperation there, but oftentimes it's not out of desperation, it's out of selfishness and greed. We want something for free, we want something easily, and we're prepared to risk our life to do that. I saw a video some time ago. It was a diver in South Africa, and he'd put like a GoPro camera onto his head, so it was like his eye view, and he was diving down to collect, I'm not sure what it was. He had not lobsters, but some kind of shellfish, some quite valuable shellfish that was there, and so he'd set up some kind of cages to catch these things in. And it was showing his eye view. He's diving down, and he's showing his eye view as he's collecting these things and putting them into his net, into his basket. And then all of a sudden, this great white shark just, comes flying past his camera, and he starts screaming and racing back up to his boat again. And it's like the risks that people will take in order to accumulate wealth and in order to get the things that we need in life. So we're prepared to risk our lives for the sake of wealth in order to get things that we don't need. There was the actor Will Smith, who was actually a friend of the Krishna Consciousness movement now. He was saying that people in this world, they are busy buying things that they don't need to please people that they don't love, something like that. So we people are undergoing so much risk and undergoing so much difficulty and so much austerity, actually, for accumulating much, much more than they actually need. So here, the Bhagavatam's warning us of not becoming too entangled in this sort of desire. And that's not to say that, if it's like we were having a nice conversation yesterday. I was with Ben and Kat taking prasadam, and we were talking about technology and phones and gadgets and things like this. And, Ben and I both sort of have like a common, a little bit of a nerdy attraction for these kind of things. And we were talking about, well, how can we use these things to serve Krishna? How can we make videos to promote Krishna consciousness? How can we make music to promote Krishna consciousness? Kat's going to use her what's it called, like graphic design knowledge to help me in her spare time, I should say, design the Vyasa Puja book for this year's Vyasa Puja. So it's not that if we have an attraction for these things that we can't use them in Krishna's service. And this is where the secret lies, that austerity and renunciation does not necessarily mean moving into the forest, and certainly in Scotland that would be very impractical. We may get away with it in certain parts of the world, but you wouldn't have too much to eat here in the forest most of the year, and the weather certainly wouldn't be very conducive anyway. But there's this sort of conception that austerity and renunciation, because we hear these kind of instructions in the Bhagavatam and these warnings in the Bhagavatam, and sometimes the tendency can be for the mind to sort of go to the other extreme, that here the Bhagavatam's warning against falling into the trap of being lured by excessive desire for wealth and opulence and so on and so forth. And so we think when we hear these things, we can sometimes develop this what's called false renunciation, where even without having the actual inner spirit of renunciation, we may walk around in torn clothes and, eat a tenth of what our body actually needs, if that, starve ourselves half to death in the name of Krishna consciousness. And, we're walking around wearing nothing but a gumsha in the middle of Scotland in the middle of winter because we're trying to be renounced. We're trying to be austere because the Bhagavatam is warning, be careful about these kind of things. But Srila Rupa Goswami, he teaches this principle of yukta vairagya, which is using everything in Krishna's service. Krishna is Bhagavan. He's the source of all wealth, all strength, all fame, all knowledge, all beauty, and all renunciation. All these things come from him, and all these things belong to him. So the process of Krishna consciousness is austerity and renunciation in the sense that we try not to take more than we need for ourselves, but for Krishna, we can have as much as we want for the sake of serving Krishna. We can use everything that is available in the world for serving Krishna. We can build palaces and we can live in those palaces if those palaces are built for and dedicated to the service of Krishna. Prabhupada gives the example of the servant of the king, lives in the same building as the king, looks at the same walls, sees the same pictures on the walls, walks on the same comfortable carpets and rugs, even eats the same food as the king. But everything belongs to the king. He always understands his position as a servant of the king. So everything belongs to Krishna, including the wealth. All the wealth in the world belongs to Krishna. So, Prabhupada, there's one amusing instruction that Srila Prabhupada gave to the book distributors. He said, make lots of money, get rich, go back to Godhead. But who is the wealth for? Who are we making the money for? Who is the riches for? They're for Krishna. Get that wealth for Krishna. Make a beautiful temple for Krishna. Have big cars for Krishna, for serving the Sankirtan movement. Have the best that's available for the sake of spreading Krishna consciousness. And this is yukta vairagya. We have tablets and phones and computers and so much technology. Why not use these things for spreading Krishna consciousness? Why not use these things? We were this was going back quite a few years now, so it's a different story now, but maybe 10 years ago, something like that, there was a growing movement in the world, like a kirtan yoga movement, which really didn't have anything much to do with bhakti. It was quite impersonal, the mood and the motivation and the understanding, the philosophy behind it was quite an impersonal philosophy. And one devotee made the comment that, why are we not on the cutting edge of this? We should be right at the forefront of this, spearheading this. This is Lord Chaitanya's movement, So, and then using technology, using social media, using YouTube and Facebook and all sorts of things at our disposal, we now see that ISKCON, for instance, has really caught up in this regard and is now, one of the forefront of this type of movement. So renunciation and austerity doesn't mean giving these things up in the sense that we just live so austerely that, for a start, there's not too many people in the world that would necessarily be attracted to such a lifestyle. Who would be attracted if this is the way that we live, that we're so uncomfortable and we're so cold and we're so kind of frugal all the time, and even like the food that we eat. This was one of the weapons that Srila Prabhupada gave us to use in spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. There are some philosophies in the world and some spiritualists in the world who, because they have this understanding that I'm not the body, but it's like a sort of impersonal understanding that I'm not the body, then in order to realize that and in order to sort of increase my understanding of that concept, then when they eat very, very, very plain food, really, really plain food, unsalted, unspiced, just almost tasteless food, because they don't want to increase the sensual pleasures of the body. They don't want to increase consciousness of the senses within the body. But the process of bhakti is all about using the senses to serve Krishna. And this is the spiritual world. This is the spiritual world. The spiritual world is not an impersonal place. It's a place where every step is a dance and every word is a song, as Lord Brahma describes in the Brahma Samhita. So the spiritual world is a place of joyfulness, singing and dancing and color and wonderful experiences. And so what we're doing in the process of bhakti is introducing the spiritual world into our lives. So the senses can be engaged in so many ways, so many wonderful ways in Krishna consciousness, but in a way in which those things are offered to Krishna. We can enjoy music that has been offered to Krishna. We can enjoy really nice prasadam that has been offered to Krishna. We can enjoy color and art and dance, and we can engage all of the senses in a really wonderful, joyful way, which engages all the senses and satisfies all the senses. We can engage the mind and the intelligence in hearing, really wonderful stories and pastimes and philosophy. Yesterday we were having a sangha with devotees in Edinburgh, and we were discussing the pastime of Lord Balaram's killing Dhenukasura. We decided we would study that over the next week, preparing for Lord Balaram's appearance day. And it came to the description of Krishna's footprints in the dust of Vrindavan. And then that reminded us of something in one of Shivaram Swami's books about Vrindavan, where he was saying that Sanatana Goswami, it's from a commentary by Sanatana Goswami in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where he describes that although Nanda Maharaj has 9 lakhs of cows, 900,000 cows, usually when you see a picture of Krishna tending the cows, like at the back there, you see Krishna, you see a few cowherd boys, maybe a few cows, but it was just this ocean of cows and cowherd boys that would go out every day with Krishna, just 900,000 cows, and all the cowherd boys. I don't know if there was one cowherd boy per cow, but it's just an ocean that would go out with Krishna every day. And Krishna would walk barefoot because the culture of the cowherds was that they wouldn't put themselves into a more advantageous position than the cows. So because the cows were barefoot, the cowherd men wouldn't wear shoes. They would also be barefoot, so they wouldn't put themselves in a better position than the cows. So in this way, Krishna's footprints were all over Vrindavan. And it was described that Sanatana Goswami described that once in Vrindavan, there was this huge meeting of all the animals in Vrindavan, all of the cows and the peacocks and the monkeys, all the animals, they came together to meet, and they agreed amongst themselves that they would never disturb Krishna's footprints. So there's 900,000 cows, but none of Krishna's footprints disappear, because they all somehow managed to walk around them rather than stepping over them. So in this way, there's just, there's all this wonderful stories and philosophy and color and dancing and tasty prasadam. Krishna consciousness is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And this is real renunciation, to live a really wonderful, rich, opulent, joyful life, engaging our senses in Krishna's service. This is the real wealth. They say that austerity is the wealth of the Brahmins, and there's so many different descriptions in Shastra all about different wealth of knowledge and wealth of this and wealth of that. So as devotees, it's not that we're giving up wealth, but we're understanding what is real wealth. and who that real wealth belongs to. So wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, renunciation, all these things come from Krishna. All these things belong to Krishna. All these things are to be offered to Krishna. And we, as Krishna's devotees, can accept the prasadam. We can accept the prasadam of those things which have been offered to Krishna. And this is what we want to show the world, that spiritual life, Krishna consciousness, doesn't mean giving up life's pleasures. It actually means accepting the real pleasures for the very first time. These are the real pleasures that are there to be experienced. You know, there is nothing like prasadam. There's no food in the world like prasadam. and there is no art comparable with the windows to the spiritual world that Srila Prabhupada taught us. There's no dance comparable to kirtan. There's no music comparable to kirtan. There's nothing more beautiful to the eyes than seeing the deities beautifully dressed on the altar. There's no more wonderful place to live than the temple of the Lord, you know, and there's no better way to use cars and technology and wealth and money and opulence than to use it in Krishna's service. There's no more better and more satisfying way to actually use these things than to use them in Krishna's service. So the wonderful thing about bhakti is that it's all about finding what you love to do and doing it for Krishna. That's really what bhakti yoga is all about. What do you love to do? What are you good at? Do it for Krishna. Whatever it is, just find a way to do that for Krishna. I was hearing this morning that, and obviously this is something that has to be taken sort of objectively, but one devotee was quoting from the Brihad Bhagavatam Rita, and Sanatana Goswami was explaining that whatever it is that we are most, that we have, whatever service gives us the most taste in Krishna consciousness, that is the service that will ultimately take us back to Godhead. So finding that thing which really gives us taste. So obviously that's to be taken objectively, because there's always the sort of angle that, well, we also have to sort of get done the things that need to get done. But finding those things that we love to do and doing those things for Krishna, this will actually take us back to Godhead. This is the thing that will actually take us back to the spiritual world. So Krishna consciousness doesn't mean giving up anything. It means doing the things that we love to do, but doing them for Krishna, doing everything for Krishna. And in this way, our lives do not have to be so austere and so uncomfortable, but we can actually experience more joy and more happiness than any other type of life. So then the science of bhakti is there to teach us how to actually do that. If we're feeling that, well, you know, I don't feel so happy, I don't feel so joyful, then we have to be introspective, we have to look within, we have to analyze our life, and we have to think, well, you know, where am I going wrong? Because the process, you know, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that it's joyfully performed. So if we're not joyful in our practice of Krishna consciousness, then it may be that there is somewhere along the line that we are not quite applying the process of bhakti properly. Maybe our chanting is not being done properly. Maybe, you know, somewhere along the line, maybe there's something we're not doing that we should be doing. Maybe there's something we are doing that we shouldn't be doing. But somewhere along the line, there may be some ingredient. Like when you cook a meal, you know, if you taste a meal and it doesn't taste quite right, it means there was either too much of something or too little of something, or something there that shouldn't be there, or something not there that should have been there. So in the same way, you know, bhakti, there's a recipe for bhakti. Nectar of devotion, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of instruction, Ishopanishad, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita. These are the recipe books for bhakti. These are the recipe books for the process of bhakti. And we're trying to sort of cook that recipe and offer it to Krishna by preparing ourselves. We're cooking ourselves in the fire of the Sankirtan movement and preparing ourselves as an offering to Krishna. And if somehow we're not feeling that everything's quite as it should be, then we need to go to the recipe books and find out, well, what is it that's not there? What ingredients not there? What am I doing too much of? What am I doing too little of? What is it that's not quite right within the recipe? Keep studying the recipe books, read them regularly to keep, because it's an ongoing session of cooking. And even if it doesn't work out quite right in one day, it's not that's it, it's burnt, it's over, it's done. But we spend our whole lives kind of constantly revising the recipe and constantly revising the cookbooks and trying to get it right. And Krishna gives us unlimited opportunities to keep getting it right and keep getting it right, keep getting it right. So this is the process, and it doesn't have to be a life devoid of joy and happiness. Quite the opposite, actually. Quite the opposite. When we look at places such as this in the Srimad Bhagavatam, what these are real warnings that actually these burning desires for material happiness, they're actually the sources of misery. There's this wonderful verse in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end. It's a really, really nice way that Krishna describes it, because he's talking about exactly the same thing. But in the first half of the verse, he says the sources of misery. And in the second half of the verse, he says such pleasures. So we judge a thing by the final result. We may get some sense gratification. And one example you could say, it's like when before I came here, and I used to go out drinking and taking drugs and raving and doing all these crazy things. You would have fun on the night, but the next day you would feel absolutely terrible. And quite often the whole rest of the week I would feel terrible. But because I had no intelligence, I wasn't able to put two and two together and think, well, this is actually the result. The result isn't the 2 or 3 hours of sense gratification that you get on the night. The result is the week of misery that follows it. The result is the diseases and so many problems with the body that come years afterwards. The little bit of fleeting sense gratification, that's not the real result. So Krishna's saying that material happiness, material wealth, fame, knowledge, beauty, renunciation, and so on, these things may give some fleeting sense gratification, but the ultimate result is that these are actually the sources of misery. They're the sources of misery. So it's not even that we have to give up happiness to become Krishna conscious. Actually, we give up misery to become Krishna conscious. But material energy is very, 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 very strong and very amazing at her job. And she has got us really believing strongly that we're happy when we're not happy. And this is the real sort of challenge as devotees sharing Krishna consciousness with others. And it very often, it doesn't work just to say to people, you're miserable, you're unhappy. First of all, usually the most effective thing is to show people actual happiness. When people actually take prasadam, when people do kirtan, then something awakens within them. And then when they go back to the material activities, it takes on a whole different dimension. So the one example is like a person's living on a desert island, and the only water they've ever, I mean, obviously it's an analogy because you wouldn't survive very long drinking only salt water. But if the only thing you'd ever tasted with salt water, your whole life you'd only ever tasted salt water, then you wouldn't necessarily think that there was anything wrong with it. But then you finally give that person a mango or mango smoothie to drink or something like that, and they would drink it, and the taste would be so alien and so sort of strange and overwhelming that it may not even be very appealing at first because it's such an alien concept. But then when they go back and drink the salt water, because the tongue has tasted something sweet and relishable, then all of a sudden the salt water doesn't taste quite as good as they thought it did. And then they may go backwards and forwards a little bit, but eventually come to the conclusion that actually the mango juice is a lot nicer. So in the same way, we can say to people, joy, ecstasy, bliss, so on and so forth. But we need to give people prasadam, give people the holy name, give people Krishna's pastimes, give people kirtan. And they may go backwards and forwards a little, but the inevitable conclusion is that eventually this will awaken people that this is the higher taste. You know, Krishna's saying this in the Gita, you can give up the objects of the senses, but the taste for sense objects remains. But when we get the higher taste, then we become fixed in consciousness. So we have to give them the higher taste, give them that higher taste somehow or other. And then gradually, it may take a while. It's certainly taking me a while, but this is the process. So we'll stop there. It's almost past. If anyone has any questions or corrections, comments, reflections, anything from anyone here or anything from anybody online? Mother Vrinda.
Volunteer was in touch with me and she's saying, just how she can she's actually just good request. And she says how she never felt as though she can't experience the same peace and joy as when she was here. So I want to become a Hare Krishna.
Wow.
So I kind of put in contact with the local temple.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. It's a wonderful program because we may not see so many people directly here at Krishna Eco Farm,
but so many people are coming and getting that experience. They're going to become devotees. And Kodanitai Mayapushashi won't forget the role that the devotees played in bringing those people to that experience. You know, Prana, do you have your hand up there? I thought I couldn't.
Something different tonight. Sometimes people are so certain that they commit crime and not to get caught, so they just want to live. And so they commit a crime and they plan to get caught so that at least it's somewhere to stay and get fed.
Yeah.
We knew one boy who broke into a shop and he just started drinking some booze and eating Mars bars waiting on the cops coming so that we'd have a place to stay for the winter. And it's quite often, not quite often, but it's not an isolated incident. Even sometimes, because ISKCON was doing food distribution so well in India, the people were trying to sneak into the prison. Normally people try to break out, but people were trying to break in so they could have like good food, 3 good meals a day.
Oh, they were distributing food in the prisons?
Yeah.
Right.
Back to Juru Maharaj here, they arranged some amazing food program for the prisons, and they were getting so well fed that people were thinking they're better off in the jails, so they were trying to sneak in under trucks and things.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's like we have to look at these kind of things subjectively. Sometimes Prabhupada will say, objectively, sometimes Prabhupada will say
things about greed and money and things like that, and then we also have to look at the other sort of side of life as well. But it's also, I was thinking, I don't know how it came into my mind, but I was thinking the other day about the situation of prisoners on death row. I mean, obviously in this country that's not a thing, but in America and other countries, certain people commit certain crimes and they get put on death row. And they don't actually get a date. It's not that they know the date that they're going to be executed. Quite often it drags on for years and years and years. And in the background, there's all lawyers and appeals and so many things going on. And there's even instances of very famous serial killers who, were executed 10, 15, 20 years after they were arrested, because the legal system works in such a way that it just drags on before they're finally able to get the green light. Literally, the green light comes on in the sort of gas chamber or wherever to actually execute the prisoners. And, subjectively, we may think, what a horrible situation to be on, just waiting and waiting and waiting. But every single person in the material world is on death row. We're all on death row. We don't know when the day's going to come, and it's going to come without warning, you know. So, you know, it's just sort of somehow communicating that to people that, you know, the world is like a prison. The world is a dark place, you know, whether you're, you know, what is it? What's that verse? Whether you're a king or a street sweeper, eventually you're going to meet the reaper or something like that. It's whether you're anyway, it's something. It's like whether you're a king or a street sweeper, sooner or later you're going to meet with the reaper, something like that. So everyone's in the same situation, and you know, like Krishna's saying, an intelligent person doesn't take part in the sources of misery. So sometimes we see that in a very small scale. Someone goes out Saturday night, has fun, and then suffers for it the next week. But, you know, why is the pauper in the situation they're in? Maybe it's because in the previous life they had wealth, and then now and the source of their misery, how they use that wealth, becomes the source of their misery in this life. Someone in this life may be poverty stricken, and that becomes the source of opulence in the next life if they use that situation to their advantage. And you know, so it's just the material world's a difficult place. And then the only real ultimate alternative is just become Krishna conscious.
It seems also that in countries which are poverty stricken, there's a high degree of crime.
Oh.
You have to resort to unfair means to seize others' property.
Yeah.
And, of course, that's people. I think it's because they feel like either they don't get the necessities of life, or they don't get the things which everyone else is enjoying because they don't have the money. So they just out of envy. Sometimes out of necessity, or sometimes out of envy, it happens.
Yeah, because we see all these things being frustrated. You know, marketing and these kind of things, they work on everyone, whether you've got the money or not. You know, you may not have money,
But the marketing tells you, I need this, I want this, and I'll do whatever it takes to get this. And everyone, you know, everyone's sharing the same streets, looking at the same billboards, looking at the same adverts. You know, we're all seeing them, but some people can afford to do something about it and some people can't. So it just creates this divide, this huge divide that exists. So,
question, Prabhu.
Uh-huh.
So, how to understand that if I've got some say liking to a particular say technology or any, say I've got a liking towards technology, using technology or any other things like music or any other things for that matter, and say I'm trying to utilize in the service of Krishna, but where to draw a line, or how do I understand that I'm actually using it in the service of Krishna and not in the pretext feeding my own interest or feeding my own ego or going too far, but externally I'm looking like, okay, I'm using it in the service of Krishna, but rather actually I'm trying to.
Well, you know, I remember when Bhakti Prabhupada
here, and he was saying how he was really, really into cars. He used to really like driving nice cars. And then when he moved into the temple, he was given to do his service. He was given, I think, a BMW, and it was like the nicest car he ever had in his life. And then once he had used it for some time, the desire just left him. And he realized that Krishna had given him this situation, and then he'd been purified of the desire. So, you know, that's one way of looking at it. Like, is the actual, you know, we have to be introspective. We have to be able to look within ourselves. We also have to see that I may want to use something, but am I personally able to use it effectively in Krishna's service? You know, am I? We may be attracted to certain things in the world, but they may not necessarily be the things that we're particularly sort of good at doing. But, you know, if if you're good at using something, and if your situation that you're in allows you to use those things in Krishna's service, there's really no limit to what you can use, how much you can use those things. If you're actually, association of devotees and having gurus, I was going to say guru, but realistically we need to have people in our sort of immediate life as well. It can't just be that there's one person 5,000 miles away that we see once every 2 or 3 years, and in a couple of years I'll ask my spiritual master if the way that I'm using my MacBook is okay. In the meantime, let's just carry on, So, that's why it's good to keep association with devotees and to say, well, okay, Prabhu, can I just get your thoughts on this? I've been doing this little project. What do you think? Can I have some feedback? Having feedback, revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially, getting feedback. I like to do this. I enjoy doing this. I like doing it. I think I'm quite good at it. So I'm trying to use this to serve Krishna. Can you give me some feedback? Do you think I could be using it better to serve Krishna? Is there another way that I could use this same tendency to serve Krishna, which will be more effective? Because sometimes it's not just the thing that we're using, but how we're using that thing. Like, say, technology, for instance. I like using technology. So, okay, I'm using my phone, or I'm using my computer, or I'm using my tablet to try and serve Krishna, but someone may come along and say, well, why don't you, instead of using it in that way to do that thing, why don't you do it in this thing? Because that would be even more effective. Krishna speaks to us through the devotees. I remember actually Prabhupada Prana, you won't remember, many years ago. I think we were on ETV at the time. And I remember the place we were standing. Sometimes you have these little moments in life that just get like freeze framed in your mind. We were in Edinburgh on Princess Street. I remember exactly the spot. And I was complaining about something, and I was disturbed about something, like not being able to understand something. And you said, it's not that Krishna's just going to burst out of the pavement in front of you playing his flute and tell you straightforwardly to your face, this is what I want you to do. Krishna speaks through the devotees. That's how he communicates. When are we going to get Krishna's darshan? If we're lucky, it's going to happen at a very high stage of purity, but this is how Krishna communicates with us, is through the devotees. So if we do have doubts about, am I actually using this in the proper way, ask devotees,
Sorry, just a quick question. So just summarize the verses now. Rather seen here that, or seen in the verse that it's the conditioned soul who is morose because he doesn't have these things, or because he's poverty stricken. Whereas a liberated soul wouldn't be morose, is that right? So even if so it said that the verse says that sometimes having no money, the conditioned soul, blah blah blah, he's deprived, right, and then he's morose. So would that mean that a liberated soul wouldn't be morose, regardless of his material condition, then he would be atmarama, self-satisfied?
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole idea, joyfully performed. That's joyfully performed. Of course, there's also, to get more esoteric
and not getting into it in too much detail, there are also transcendental moroseness, but that's also a type of ecstasy. The separation from Krishna, feeling separation from Krishna. An elevated soul may not always appear to be joyful, but generally speaking, if we're actually practicing bhakti properly, then there's going to be satisfaction, joyfulness, contentment. And even if there appears to be some lacking there, the person's going to be thinking of Krishna and focusing on Krishna and not hankering and lamenting for mundane things. Is that okay? Would you sort of add anything to that, or?
Just I guess that that's all right. Just people to be satisfied, whatever. So the idea is that With your two hands, what can you hold? If you take your two hands, what can you hold on to? So if the devotee is satisfied in devotional service, they use whatever they have, or if they don't have anything, then they make the best of whatever's there. Like Prabhupada came with nothing, but because of his faith, then he continued doing his service and Krishna gave. And there was Atopsha sometimes mentions an example of one devotee in Russia who was out for many years doing one book a day. And was sincerely trying to do, it's not that just did one book and then went back to the temple. Was sincerely trying to do service all day, but they practically managed to do one book a day. And then something happened, and they started doing like 100 books a day or something. So he remained steady and satisfied in his service, even though he was endeavouring. He may not have been happy with what the result was, but he didn't. It was just determination. So sometimes, what would a devotee's moroseness be justified?
Well, there can always be anxiety for wanting to do more.
Krishna. You know, there can always be anxiety for that, wanting to do more, wanting to be able to offer more to Krishna, in being in anxiety for those who don't have Krishna consciousness. You know, we may ourselves have all the wonderful. That's why it's, what is it? It says in the Bhagavatam, almost all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely removed. And sometimes people ask, well, what is it that's not removed? And these are the examples that are given. Anxiety for the fallen souls, you know, the feeling troubled about the state of the material world, feeling that we're not doing enough to please Krishna, even though we may be doing as much as we're able to do for Krishna, but still there may be some anxiety there, that wishing we could do more or feeling we could do more.
Around the world concerned, very concerned about the effects of climate change and the kind of turmoil that could have amongst them. Like whole countries having to evacuate because there's going to be underwater or things like this, wars and things. So they're stressing the need to have farming communities. So some are kind of
But I'll is it okay?
One last thing, because I know we're going over time. I'm kind of looking at you because I don't want to get in trouble for kind of going over too long. But, you know, one thing that came to mind is that we may see problems in the world, but the answer is Krishna consciousness. I was looking on Facebook, as I'm wont to do from time to time, and I was looking at a couple of profiles of some quite long-standing devotees, and it was quite unsettling that I was scrolling through the thing, and the only thing that was there was all about COVID, conspiracies, this, that, the next thing, and there was nothing about Krishna. There was nothing about Krishna. There was nothing about, it was just, you know, this is happening, you know, the governments are doing this, and COVID this, and COVID that, and governments this, and conspiracy that. And it's like, yeah, these things are all going on. Climate change is going on. Insidious governments are there in the world. Demoniac leaders are there in the world. You know, there's so much wrong in the world. And we can spend weeks and weeks and months and years and decades talking about all that's wrong in the world. But all these things are just symptoms of the same one common disease, lack of Krishna consciousness. So we've got the cure for all disease. So we've got the cure for climate change, we've got the cure for conspiracies, we've got the cure for, so, you know, everything ultimately is cured by Krishna consciousness. So, you know, we can see the things that are wrong in the world and it can make us unhappy. But if we're sort of dwelling on the things that are wrong without actually applying the medicine, both for ourselves and for others as well, then, you know, how are we going to bring about any change? So Krishna consciousness is the change. It's like the change of heart, right? They say, you know, there has to be a change of heart.
I'm just saying, in the sense of devotees we had to leave so that we can continue giving out the sign. It's like a poetry. There isn't this and then only kids maintain that and they've got committees like healthcare and things like that too, because of that concern for
Yeah. There's a big subject. We'll have to stop there. I hope this was okay, and thank you. Srimad
Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shri Kodanitai Maya Pushashi ki jai, Nitai Gaur Pramanandi.
Yeah.